Evolution. We've all heard of it, but what is it? Evolution is the change in the characteristics of a species over generations which relies on the process of natural selection. When the Earth first formed, there were no living organisms because it was inhabitable. Over 3.5 billion years ago, single-celled organisms first emerged, starting the formation of the trillions that we see today. Cyanobacteria, the first organism to have performed photosynthesis, helped create an oxygen-rich environment we see today. As oxygen became more abundant, larger organisms were able to evolve into many other species. Here's where everything started. If you think this is Darwin, you've been lied to. This is the real Darwin. Anyways, in 1859, Charles Darwin decided to go on an adventure to the Galapagos Islands. His observations proved to be mind-boggling, which set up for the theory of evolution. His primary focus of studies were the finches. Darwin figured out that the finches evolved over time to adapt to the changing environment. It is important to note that the finches don't simply acquire new traits all of a sudden. These changes occur over time. For example, the Galapagos Island suffered a drought, resulting in only larger and harder seeds to be available, rather than smaller fruits. The finches with larger beaks survived because they were able to break up the hardened seeds.
Overall, there are three types of selection: stabilizing, directional, and disruptive. Disruptive selection refers to two extremes being favored in a population over the moderate type, almost opposite of stabilizing selection. In this case, the two extremes are the pink and the blue blobs. The purple blob, a mix between the two, does not survive and gets squished. Stabilizing selection refers to when moderate traits are favored in an environment over the two extreme traits. As you can see here, the moderate organism is favored over the tall organism and short organisms. A real-life example of this would be when puppies are underweight or overweight, they have trouble adapting in their early years. The next type of selection is directional selection. Directional selection is when one extreme trait is more beneficial than the other, and an example of this was the survival patterns of peppered moths. As the environment became more polluted, the dark-colored moths camouflaged from their predators, while the lighter moths did not. Speciation refers to the formation of new species as evolution takes place. Most commonly, new plant and animal species are created this way. There are two main ways of speciation occurring: anagenesis and cladogenesis. Anagenesis is when one species transforms into another and the ancestral species dies off, while cladogenesis is when the ancestral species is still alive. But how do the same animals actually turn into different species?
This is where the 5 prezygotic barriers come in. Let's take a closer look at each one. This is Bob the Blob chilling with his wonderful family. They were going on with their days and then bam, their island splits. Half of his family were stuck in a green environment full of trees and leaves while the others were stuck in the ice-cold tundra. Slowly over many years, the family members in the tundra started to turn white in order for them to protect themselves from the predators by camouflaging themselves. Bob's family had just gone through habitat isolation where they adapted to the environments around them. To further differentiate between the species, sometimes they will mate during different seasons. Some of Bob's family like to mate during the winter, while the rest of his family like to mate during the summer. This is called temporal isolation. By mating during different seasons, they prevent interbreeding between the species, further differentiating them. Sticking to the topic of mating, behavioral isolation is where a certain type of behavior or a set of behaviors are preferred by mating by one. In this example, Charlie is singing, whereas Danny is not. Susie prefers to mate with those who sing. Sometimes species have different structures that prevent successful mating, which is known as mechanical isolation. For example, even though some flowers might belong to the same species, their appearances attract different pollinators. But what if mating runs deeper than the outside appearances? This is where gametic isolation comes in. Gametic isolation is when the sperm of one species does not have the ability to fertilize the eggs of another species.
We've talked about prezygotic barriers, which are present before mating occurs. There are male and female organisms from two different species. Because their gametes are not compatible, their child is not developed completely. This is called reduced hybrid viability. A real-life example of this is a salamander, in which the genes of the parent species interact that may impair the hybrid offspring's development. But sometimes, even if the development is complete, the offspring is sterile, meaning it can't reproduce anymore. The first generation may be fertile, but the second generation is not able to reproduce anymore, stopping the reproduction in the population. This, on the other hand, is called reduced hybrid breakdown. As you can see, evolution is a prominent process in Earth's development. Some examples to show evolution over time include the anatomical similarities and differences scientists have observed over time. The similarities between parts of organisms is evident through the study of homologous structures, which also provides evidence that there is a common ancestor to all of these organisms. These structures are similar but may not serve the same function. On the other hand, analogous structures don't look alike between different organisms but serve the same function. This little butterfly and bat have similarities, not in terms of their appearance, but in what their wings are designed for. Other types of structures include vestigial structures, in which the original functions of their parts have been lost over time. This is most notably seen within the human appendix, as it serves no function of transporting food or waste.